The 3rd gen paints from AK Interactive are popular among many pro painters and high-profile YouTubers. But are they suitable for you if you're more of a beginner or intermediate painter? Or should you opt for newer paint ranges like Warpaints Fanatic or Too Thin Coats? I'm Stahly from Tale of Painters, and in this video I'll be reviewing not only all 236 AK 3rd gen paints, including the brand new Color Punch sub-range, but also reveal the IMO biggest issue with this paint range and how to overcome it. For those who don't know me yet, I regularly test the latest releases in the miniature paint market. By now, I think I might have ended up with one of the largest miniature paint collections in the world. Many of you have often asked me in the comments of my videos if I could test the 3rd gen range from AK, even though it's been out for quite a while now. Your wish is my command. I've been using AK paint for several years, so I knew what to expect. But for this review, I've acquired a complete core range of 230 plus colors, including the brand new Color Punch paints. Actually, this is not all, as the 3rd gen range has a few more expansions. There is the AFV series with 80 additional colors for tanks and other combat vehicles, the Air series, which is actually not an airbrush range but a selection of 120 colors for painting aircraft models, plus the figure range for painting busts and larger models with 40 more colors. In this video, I'll be looking at the core general range, which is the best choice for tabletop and scale model painters, as it offers everything you need from regular acrylics to metallics, plus a couple of useful additives and effect paints. There is one thing I really don't like about this paint range. You might have a hunch of what it could be when looking at the official color chart. But more about that later. Let's go through all the paint types of the core range step by step. I would like to start with the metallics because in my opinion, metallic paints are always a good indicator of the quality of a paint range. The general range has a total of 20 metallic colors, and you can recognize them by this blue label. Alongside staples like silver, gold and various bronze and copper tones, there are also some colored metallics, which is quite cool as not every range has those. AK paints are available in 17 ml dropper bottles of standard size. Unfortunately, the bottles do not contain pre-installed mixing balls, and that's a problem because the metallics tend to separate. This means that over time, the denser pigments separate from the transparent binder medium and sink to the bottom. I didn't have this problem that much with the darker metallics, but with the lighter ones, simply shaking wasn't enough. Instead, I had to use my vortex mixer to get those paints to the perfect consistency. Did you have a similar experience? Let me know in the comments. However, once you've put in the work, you'll be rewarded with a beautiful sparkling finish with very fine metallic particles. The consistency is a bit on the thinner side, but this helps to apply the paint smoothly. The coverage with the darker colors is very good, but the lighter metallics pose some problems here too, as they are noticeably less opaque, especially the 4 white silver colors, dark aluminium, silver and pearl, as well as the light gold tones. Perhaps due to the excessive shaking and mixing, I sometimes had the issue of the paints throwing many micro bubbles, which don't disappear completely when drying if you're not careful. Overall, the metallics have their ups and downs. I love the finish, but for the lighter ones, I would rather go for other paint ranges such as Pro Cruel or Too Thin Coats. Therefore, I can give the metallics only 6 out of 10 points. The darker metallics are really good, don't get me wrong, but the lighter ones bring down the overall result for me. That's a bit of a rough start. I hope this review doesn't go downhill from here. Before I dive into the regular acrylics and the new Color Punch paints, let's briefly touch on the additives, effect paints and inks. With the additives labeled in grey, you get some useful mediums that you can mix into paints to tweak their finish. They do what they're supposed to do, 9 out of 10 points, really solid products. The effect paints are quite new additions to the range. They have a light green label. So far there's a blood paint, which is quite dark like old dried blood, a pasty viscera paint and a chipping effect. Perhaps these are not my most favorite blood paints, but with some experimentation I'm sure you can pull off quite unique effects. 6 out of 10. Something that's no longer available are these brown labeled inks, as they have been replaced by AK's new range in pipette bottles. Unlike other inks such as Game Color or most contrast and speed paints, the brown label AK inks contained a high proportion of opaque covering pigments. This means that they were only semi-transparent and visible even on dark base coats. Think of Nihilak Oxide from Games Workshop, which has quite a similar feel. They were lacking in terms of saturation, which is why they've probably been replaced with the new range. I give them 7 out of 10 as they were quite unique, but I think they would have been more useful if there would have been more brown and rust colors for weathering. Alright, let's take a look at the bread and butter part of the range, the regular non-metallic acrylic paints. Will these provide us with an answer to why AK 3rd Gen has such a good reputation among pro painters? Let's find out. The regular acrylic paints come in not 1 but 3 different labels, actually 4 counting the new Color Punch paints. First, there are the yellow label Intense colors. Don't confuse these with the likes of Citadel base paints or the old Citadel foundation paints. They are not designed to be super covering. Instead, they contain a high proportion of pure pigment, making them extra vibrant at an expense of opacity. Next, we have a handful of pastel colors with a cyan blue label. These are extra light colors you can use for extreme edge highlights or for brightening up darker colors. Having tried them all, I'm not sure if they really needed their own label. I think they could have been part of the orange label colors, which make up the majority of the range. Here you will find all the regular non-metallic paints, but to make things a bit confusing, the orange label also has a couple of fluorescent colors and clear paints sprinkled in. The 5 fluo paints are quite thin and weak like fluorescent paints usually are, while the 5 clear paints are highly glossy inks that can be sprayed through an airbrush as transparent filters, for example. Personally, I think it would have been made more sense to give these their own labels instead of the pastel colors. But enough of the nitpicking, how do the paints perform? Well, with the acrylics I had less of a separation issue than with the metallics. I only encountered it with a few colors, mainly the intense label ones, and shaking them was usually enough to restore their consistency. Speaking of consistency, what do you think? I feel it's quite nice and probably one of the range's main selling points. It's not too thin, not too thick, and perhaps most importantly, very consistent across the board. By that I mean hardly any differences in thickness and density between the various colors. The application is nice and smooth. They have a good flow and they thin well without breaking apart, for example when glazing. The self-leveling properties are good. Not quite as good as with too thin coats or Pro Cruel, but still in the top tier. Whether it's base coating, highlighting or dry brushing, I feel like the paint is working with you and not against you. They dry to a matte finish with a slight sheen. One thing I noticed is that a lot of colors become darker in their dried state, which is also a thing for Pro Cruel paints, for example. When it comes to airbrushing 3rd Gen paints, I have read mixed reviews online. Some posts were very positive, others seem to have had problems. I have tested a few colors and I have to say that once you get a feel for the correct thinning ratio, I was able to achieve very good results. As always, I used my trusty Vallejo paint thinner with a drop of flow improver, but AK also offers their own range of thinners. But what about brush coverage? Actually, pretty good. I would say better than with Games Workshop and on par with Pro Cruel. But, and here comes a slight but, not quite as good as with paint ranges like Too Thin Coats or Warpaints Fanatic, which feature a very high amount of opaque pigment. In general, AK 3rd Gen went for a higher proportion of pure color pigment, which results in higher saturation, especially with the brighter and more vibrant colors. Perhaps that's why they're popular among pro painters who don't mind to apply an extra coat or two. But to come back to the question posed in the intro, would I recommend the paint range for beginners and advanced painters alike? Well, except for the metallics, it's a very balanced paint range and therefore I can recommend the paint itself for painters of any skill level. But I have one major gripe, and I believe that those who don't have much experience with color theory will struggle with it as well. And that's the official paint chart, more precisely its lack of organization. See, other paint ranges like Too Thin Coats or Reaper are organized into triads, which make it easy for beginners and even colorblind people to understand which colors go together. Warpaints Fanatic are even structured in sets of 6 steps from dark to light, with a graphic printed on the bottles. In contrast, AK 3rd Gen seems like a chaotic bunch of colors, and it doesn't help that the range has that many similar shades. Need 5 almost identical dark rays that differ only in nuances, or 6 almost identical medium reds. Well, brilliant, and AK 3rd Gen is right up your alley. Don't get me wrong, choice is great, especially if you're a paint nerd and know all the designations of all the fundamental pigments in your sleep. But good luck determining the differences based on the official chart, as it is, like all digital paint swatches, not very accurate. This makes buying paint a gamble, especially online, where you have to rely on product photos provided by the manufacturer. This very issue actually held me back from investing more in the 3rd Gen range for a long time, because I simply didn't know which colors to add to my collection. And because it annoyed me so much, I sat down and came up with a solution. I painted all 236 colors, plus the discontinued inks and the deep shade washes on plastic card, professionally photographed them, and created one of my hand-painted color swatches. For this, I've reorganized the colors in families, for example, grouping all muted reds from light to dark, all warm reds, then all cool reds, and so on. I also made an alternative version that's identical to the order in the official paint chart, so you have that as well. And of course, the chart is also compatible with my other charts for Citadel, the Army Painter, Vallejo and Too Thin Coats, allowing you to cross-compare different paint ranges, for example, to convert old paint schemes or tutorials from White Dwarf. You can find my hand-painted swatches for a small donation on Patreon, and I think they make expanding your paint collection much easier and help you avoid making any more purchasing mistakes. I hope that AK will soon come up with a guide for recommended color combinations on their own, as Vallejo did with their revised model color range, which is the counterpart to AK's 3rd Gen range. If you're interested in a review of the new model color formula, make sure you subscribe to my channel, as you don't want to miss it. I also appreciate a thumbs up, as it helps me reach more people, as my subscriber count is still rather low. What's not low is my score for AK's acrylic paints. Despite my difficulties navigating the color palette, I give the yellow, orange and blue label paints, and actually the whole range, a solid 8 out of 10 points. But I still have to talk about the brand new Color Punch paints. So what are these, and do you need them? I'll show you by mixing intense yellow with Color Punch Dragon Blood, which is a warm purple. Can you see that the intermediate tones are not losing much of their vibrancy? For comparison, I'm mixing Yellow Flame with Royal Cloak, both from the Too Thin Coats range, which contain a high proportion of opaque pigments, which are usually white or grey. Can you see the difference? While fine on their own, in direct comparison with AK, they seem significantly desaturated, and the in-between color appears dirtier and brownish. So essentially, Color Punch are like the Yellow Label Intense paints, containing very rich and pure pigments, except that they tend to feature darker shades and tertiary colors that you can use to add depth to your shadows and paint mixes. If you want to learn to paint at a high level, using a more classic artist palette, or perhaps already do and value pigment purity, and are attracted to the Color Punch palette, I'd say give them a try. You can get them all in this high intensity set. I give them 8 out of 10, but for those who prefer quick results and high opacity, I think they are far from essential. If you are more someone who likes quick results without big fuss and without having to apply multiple coats each time, then you need to watch my review of the new Warpaints Fanatic here on the right. When marketing this range, the Army Painter promised particularly high coverage, and I'll tell you if that's true. Thanks a lot and happy hobbying!